When I was younger, I always felt like an outsider in my own family. It's tough to put into words, but I've come to terms with the fact that I was never truly valued the way a family should value their child. Growing up, I was the older brother, the firstborn, and my little brother Ryan, who's 7 years younger than me, was the shining star. I'm 24 now and he's 17, but that gap between us has always felt like an insurmountable divide. It wasn't long after Ryan was born that I noticed the shift. My parents' world seemed to start revolving around him as if I were just a supporting character. I remember wondering if I was just overreacting, hoping that maybe things would even out as we grew older. But the reality I now see is harsher than any childhood imagination. Take last Christmas, for example. Ryan got a brand new PS5 with the whole setup, exactly what he'd been dreaming of. Meanwhile, my gift was a single package of plain white socks from Walmart. The socks themselves didn't matter to me, but the fact that this was all they thought I was worth hurt. Sitting there with that small package, watching everyone fawn over Ryan and his mountain of gifts, was a harsh reminder of the truth I'd come to understand over the years. Birthdays were no different. They'd practically stopped acknowledging mine after I turned 10, maybe even before that. But when Ryan's birthday rolls around, it's like a national holiday. Last year, when he turned 16, my parents threw him a massive party, complete with a bounce house, a magician, and a full spread of catered food. They even invited all our family and his friends, everyone who meant anything to him. I didn't even get an invite. When I found out about it just a day before, my parents brushed me off, saying they assumed I wouldn't be interested since I was busy with school. It's those moments, those blatant shows of favoritism, that have left scars I'm still trying to heal. I tried to keep my head up and be the good son, but it's been painfully clear that in my family I'll always come second to Ryan. The favoritism became more glaring as the years went by, and I tried to keep my distance. I poured myself into my studies, focused on getting good grades, and stayed out of trouble. Maybe I hoped my efforts would be noticed, that they'd see me as someone worth their love and attention. But nothing ever changed. Ryan, on the other hand, had this magnetic charm that seemed to captivate everyone around him. He was athletic, outgoing, the perfect kid in my parents' eyes. Meanwhile, I was the quiet, more reserved one, focused on books and studying rather than sports and social events. I remember the excitement I'd felt when I first found out I was going to have a little brother. In my head, I'd built up this fantasy of us being close, like those brothers in the movies who are practically best friends. But reality hit me hard. Ryan wasn't interested in spending time with me. He had his friends and his world, and I was just an afterthought. The resentment crept in slowly. I didn't want to feel that way, but it was impossible not to when every interaction ended with me feeling less than. Ryan began to understand just how much he meant to our parents, and I could see him using that power more and more. He knew they'd take his side no matter what. If we got into an argument, I'd be the one blamed, even if I hadn't started it. One time, Ryan and a friend of his accidentally broke our family's TV while roughhousing. I wasn't even home when it happened, but somehow Ryan convinced our parents I'd been the one to do it. Without question, they believed him. I was grounded for an entire month, my phone taken away, and was treated like a criminal in my own home. That was a breaking point for me. I started spending as little time at home as possible. I'd hang out at friends' houses or stay in my room whenever I was home, anything to avoid the constant reminder that I didn't belong there. Ryan's room was like a mini paradise, decorated with sports posters and all the latest gadgets, while my room was small, cramped, and barely acknowledged. He had his own little kingdom in our parents' eyes, and I was a shadow lingering on the sidelines. My 18th birthday was probably the most brutal reminder of all. I'd thought that maybe, just maybe, they'd do something special for me as I stepped into adulthood. But that morning was like any other. My mom was in the kitchen, my dad was reading the paper, and Ryan was playing on his new Xbox. Not a single word was said, no card, no gift, not even a happy birthday. I remember standing there feeling like an intruder in my own home. That was the day I finally accepted that things would never change. Ryan had won. He had their love, their attention, everything I'd ever wanted from them. And the worst part? I don't think he even cared. It was as if I'd become invisible. the forgotten son who'd been replaced by the golden child. The anger inside me grew with every passing day. It wasn't just sibling rivalry or jealousy. It was a deep, burning resentment. I couldn't stand the sight of him. I couldn't stand to be in the same room as him, knowing that he'd taken everything I'd ever wanted. I tried talking to my parents a few times, hoping they'd understand how hurt I felt, but every attempt was shut down. They'd say I was being dramatic or that I needed to be nicer to Ryan. But why? Why did I have to keep giving when they'd already taken everything from me? It felt like I was trapped, spiraling deeper into bitterness and resentment, and I didn't know how to break free. After years of keeping my distance, I finally moved out. I'd saved up enough to buy a small house, my own space away from the toxicity that had filled my life for as long as I could remember. Leaving felt like I was finally breaking free from the chains that had held me back. I thought that distance would give me the peace I needed, that maybe by putting miles between us I could let go of the anger I'd been holding onto for so long. And for a while, it worked. I focused on building a life for myself. I picked up freelance graphic design work to make ends meet, and as time passed, my client base grew. Late nights and endless projects became my escape, and the satisfaction of earning my own living without anyone's help was like nothing I'd ever felt. I finally had control over my life. Then I met Megan. She was everything I'd ever wanted in a partner: driven, compassionate, and fiercely independent. She freelanced in social media management, and we clicked instantly. Working side by side, we supported each other's goals, lifting each other up in a way I'd never experienced. For the first time, someone truly saw me for who I was, not just as a placeholder or a backup. She loved me for who I was, not for what I could give or what she expected of me. Megan made me feel like I mattered, something I hadn't felt with my own family. After dating for about a year, we decided to take a big step together and buy a house. It was a huge decision, one we'd saved and planned for carefully. We finally found the perfect place, a beautiful, spacious house just on the edge of town. It felt surreal. This was our dream, a place we'd built together, a future that was ours alone. But just 3 days after moving in, I got a call from my mom. We hadn't spoken much since I moved out, and every conversation we had was either painfully awkward or turned into an argument. Against my better judgment, I answered. She told me they were in town and wanted to stop by to see the new house. Part of me knew it would be better to avoid them, but I figured I'd get it over with. Maybe a short visit would keep them at bay for a while. When they showed up, I noticed something strange. My brother Ryan had brought a woman with him. My mom casually introduced her as Karen, his fiancée. She was pregnant. That was news to me. I hadn't even known Ryan was dating anyone, let alone that he was about to become a dad. The whole situation felt surreal, and before I could fully process it, my dad started making comments about the house, looking around with a judgmental smirk. "Surprised you could afford something like this," he said with a sneer, making me feel small in my own home. But I bit my tongue, trying to keep the peace. Once they were inside, things only got more uncomfortable. My mom was making awkward small talk with Megan, who could sense the tension in the air, while my dad and Ryan whispered to each other in the corner. And Karen wandered through the house as if she owned the place. Then, out of nowhere, my dad dropped the bombshell. "Since Ryan and Karen are starting a family, they'll need space for the baby. It would make sense for them to move in here." I stared at him, dumbfounded, trying to wrap my head around what he'd just said. "What?" I finally managed to get out, hoping he was joking, but he just looked at me with that condescending tone he'd always used. "This house is way too big for just you and Megan. Ryan and Karen could really use a place like this to raise their kid. You don't need all this space." The audacity of it left me speechless. They were trying to guilt me into handing over my house, a house Megan and I had worked so hard to buy. It was like they hadn't even considered that this was our home, our sanctuary. I looked at my dad, disbelief turning to anger as I realized he was completely serious. "You're joking, right?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, but he looked me dead in the eye and said, "No, we're not joking. It's time for you to step aside and let your brother have what he needs. Family comes first, and he's starting his own." That's when I lost it. Years of resentment, anger, and neglect came flooding out. I'd spent my entire life being pushed aside for Ryan, and now they wanted to take the one thing I had earned on my own. "Are you serious right now?" I said, my voice shaking. "This is our house. Megan and I bought it. You can't just waltz in here and decide that Ryan gets to have it because he knocked someone up." Ryan tried to chime in, looking all smug, like he was entitled to everything he wanted. "Come on, man," he said. "It's not like you need all this space. You don't even have kids. We do." I snapped back. "That's not the point. The point is, you don't get to take what's mine just because you think you deserve it. I've spent my whole life being pushed aside for you, and I'm done with it." My dad, puffing out his chest like he always did when he wanted to intimidate me, leaned in and said, "Watch your tone, boy. You should be grateful we're even asking and not just telling you to hand over the keys. This house is going to be Ryan's, whether you like it or not." At that moment, something inside me snapped. Years of bitterness, of feeling invisible, surged to the surface, and I lunged at him, shoving him back. "Get out of my house!" I shouted. Megan was yelling at us to calm down, but I couldn't hold back any longer. My dad shoved me, and before I knew it, we were in a full-blown fistfight, years of pent-up rage exploding between us. It wasn't until Karen called the police that we stopped. The next thing I knew, I was being hauled down to the station, my father in another holding cell beside me. Megan bailed me out a few hours later, but as I sat there, bruised and exhausted, I realized this was it. My family was broken beyond repair. But the nightmare wasn't over. My dad, in some twisted form of revenge, decided to sue me for the house, claiming Ryan and Karen needed it more than I did. I was in disbelief. It was one thing to try to guilt me in person, but to actually take me to court. It was the ultimate betrayal. Facing my dad in court was one of the hardest things I'd ever done. He stood there, painting himself as the loving father, claiming he was only trying to do what was best for the family. Ryan and Karen played the victims, saying they needed a home for their child and that I was being selfish for not sharing. I felt like I was living in some twisted reality where the truth was distorted to make me the villain. But I was prepared. I had worked hard for that house, and I wasn't going to let them take it from me without a fight. I gathered every document proving that the house was legally mine and had my lawyer present evidence of my parents' long history of favoritism, neglect, and emotional manipulation. I brought emails, texts, and even statements from friends who'd seen firsthand how they treated me as nothing more than an afterthought. I was done staying silent. The trial dragged on for months, with my dad throwing every accusation he could think of to make me look like the ungrateful son who didn't value family. He made up stories about how I had always been difficult and how I had abandoned them when I moved out. It was almost laughable, the lengths he went to in order to defend his actions, twisting reality to suit his narrative. But all his efforts fell flat. The truth was undeniable. The judge saw through his act and ruled in my favor. Not only did I keep the house, but my dad was ordered to pay me $120,000 in damages for the emotional and psychological toll their treatment had taken on me over the years. When I heard the verdict, it was like a massive weight had been lifted off my shoulders. For the first time, someone had stood up for me. I'd won, and it felt like I finally had justice. After that, I cut all ties with my parents and with Ryan. I couldn't take the toxic cycle any longer. Megan and I finally had our home to ourselves, free from the lingering shadow of my family's manipulation and resentment. We started to rebuild, focusing on creating a life together without the bitterness that had haunted me for so long. But the scars ran deep. Even as I settled into my new life, there was a part of me that still struggled with everything that had happened. I started seeing a therapist to help work through the trauma. Some days were better than others, and I'd feel like I was making real progress. Other days, though, I'd catch myself replaying old memories, feeling that familiar pain, that sense of being unwanted, and it would set me back. Megan was my rock through it all. She never wavered, not even when things got tough. She'd been there for every high and every low, and I knew that I could trust her in a way I'd never trusted anyone before. We talked about our future together, about starting a family, and for the first time, I could imagine a future without the pain of the past hanging over me. I knew I didn't need my family anymore. I had Megan, and that was enough. A couple of years passed, and life started to feel normal again. Megan and I even got married in a small, intimate ceremony with just a few close friends and her family. I didn't invite my parents or Ryan. After everything they'd put me through, I didn't feel like I owed them anything, and I wasn't about to let them ruin one of the happiest days of my life. But of course, they found out somehow. A few days after the wedding, my mom sent a long, guilt-tripping email about how hurt they were that I hadn't invited them. My dad didn't bother reaching out, which didn't surprise me. But Ryan, he took it the hardest. I hadn't expected him to react the way he did. In his mind, he was the victim of everything that had happened. He couldn't handle the fact that I had stood up for myself, that I had fought back and won. Since the court ruling, my parents haven't been as financially comfortable as they once were. The $120,000 they owed me had put a dent in their finances, and from what I'd heard through mutual friends, Ryan's relationship with Karen had fallen apart. She'd left him, taking their child with her, and moved back in with her parents. It didn't take a genius to figure out that Ryan blamed me for all of it. Then things took an even darker turn. About a month after Megan and I were married, I was out for a walk around the neighborhood, trying to clear my head, when I saw him. Ryan was standing on the corner, staring at me with this look of pure hatred in his eyes. It took me a second to even register what was happening. We hadn't spoken in years, and I had no idea why he was there or how he'd found me. "Ryan?" I called out, trying to make sense of it. But before I could process what was happening, he charged at me with an iron rod in his hand. I barely had time to react. He swung the rod, hitting me hard in the side, and the pain shot through me like fire. I doubled over, gasping for air, but he didn't stop. He brought the rod down on my legs and my arms over and over, screaming about how I'd ruined his life and how everything was my fault. I tried to get up to defend myself, but my body wouldn't cooperate. I was completely at his mercy, lying there helpless as he unleashed all his rage. By some miracle, people nearby heard the commotion and ran over, pulling him off of me and calling the police. I blacked out not long after, and when I came, I was in the hospital, battered and broken. Megan was by my side, her face pale and red from crying. The doctors told me I was lucky to be alive. I had multiple fractures, my ribs, my left leg, my right arm, and the recovery would be long and painful. Ryan was arrested that day, taken away in handcuffs, and the police assured me that he'd be facing serious charges. Megan stayed with me through every painful step of recovery, handling everything from police reports to hiring a lawyer for the upcoming court case. Physically and emotionally, I was in pieces, but I had her by my side, and that kept me going. The trial was brutal. Ryan pleaded not guilty, claiming that I had pushed him to the edge and that I was the one responsible for his actions. His lawyer argued that he'd acted out of emotional distress, but the evidence against him was overwhelming. Witnesses, medical reports, police records, all of it pointed to his guilt. Sitting in that courtroom watching him try to justify what he'd done was one of the hardest things I'd ever had to endure. But what hurt the most was that my parents were there, sitting by his side. They listened to him blame me for everything, nodding along as if they believed every word. After everything he had done, after everything they had done, they still chose him. The trial dragged on, but in the end, there was no denying the truth. Ryan was found guilty of aggravated assault and sentenced to 5 years in prison, with a possibility for parole after 3. When the judge read the verdict, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. I was glad that justice had been served, but there was no satisfaction in watching my own brother go to prison. It just felt empty. My parents, on the other hand, showed no signs of regret. They continued to look at me as though I was the one who had wronged them, like I was the one tearing the family apart. Even after all that had happened, after Ryan had nearly killed me, they still saw him as the victim. Their golden child, the one they'd always cherished, even at the cost of the rest of the family. Sitting in that courtroom, realizing that I truly meant nothing to them, was like a punch to the gut. I'd lost any hope that they would ever understand the damage they had caused. After the trial, I knew that I needed to walk away from them for good. Megan and I returned home and focused on moving forward, slowly piecing our lives back together. She was the one constant through it all, my anchor in the storm. If it hadn't been for her, I don't know how I would have made it. Together, we began building a life that was truly ours, free from the shadows of my past. But even with Ryan in prison and my parents out of my life, I couldn't shake the trauma. I started going to therapy, trying to work through the anger, the pain, and the scars that had been left behind. Some days, I felt like I was finally making progress, like I could see a future without that weight on my shoulders. Other days, it was harder to escape the memories. But with each step, Megan and I grew stronger, and our life together became something I could finally hold on to with hope. 6 months after Ryan's sentencing, things finally started to feel normal. The nightmares had lessened, I was making headway in therapy, and Megan and I were even talking about starting a family of our own. Life was slowly getting better, and for once, I felt like the worst was behind me. But then, out of nowhere, my parents pulled one last insane stunt. One day, Megan and I had planned to meet for lunch near her office. It was a simple ritual we enjoyed, a way to break up the workday and reconnect. But that afternoon, she didn't show up. At first, I assumed she was just running late, but as time passed, my worry grew. Megan never ignored my calls, and even if she was busy, she'd always send a quick text. Panic set in as I started driving around the area, calling her phone over and over. Then I got a call from a blocked number. Part of me thought it was a scam, but something told me to answer, and when I did, I heard my mother's voice, cold and calculating. "Your wife is with us," she said, her tone disturbingly calm. "We're taking her somewhere safe, where she can finally see things clearly, away from you." For a moment, I thought I was hearing things. "What the hell are you talking about? Where's Megan?" I shouted, nearly swerving off the road. My dad's voice cut in, smooth and unbothered. "We're saving her from you. You've poisoned her mind and turned her against her own family. We're doing what's best for her." My blood ran cold. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My parents had kidnapped Megan, convinced they were saving her from me. They'd twisted reality to make themselves the heroes in some bizarre narrative, and they truly believed that taking Megan was somehow justified. I tried to stay calm, though every fiber of me was screaming to do something drastic. "If you don't bring her back right now," I told them, voice shaking, "I'm calling the police." My dad just laughed. "You think we're scared of the police? She's better off without you." I hung up and immediately dialed 911. I could hardly think straight as I explained the situation to the dispatcher, my mind racing with fear. I had no idea where they'd taken her, but I wasn't about to sit back and let them get away with it. Hours passed like an eternity until, finally, the police called me back. They'd found Megan in a rundown motel on the edge of town. My parents had taken her there, locking her in a room and trying to deprogram her, saying she needed to leave me and return to her real family. But Megan, being the strong, resilient person she is, managed to escape the room and ran to the motel lobby, where she begged the staff to call the police. When I saw her again, safe but shaken, I felt a wave of relief like I'd never felt before. My parents were arrested on the spot, charged with kidnapping, false imprisonment, and a string of other crimes. As far as I'm concerned, they're dead to me. Whatever twisted stories they've told themselves to justify their actions no longer matter. They tried to take the one person who means the world to me, and I'll never forgive them for that. Megan is safe now, and we're moving on, but the sound of my mom's voice, that cold conviction that they were doing what was best for her, still haunts me. It was like they were living in some alternate reality, where they were the heroes and I was the villain. For the first time, I'm ready to close the door on this chapter of my life completely. Whatever happens with my parents, it's no longer my concern. They've made their choice, and I've made mine. I'm done with them forever. Now, Megan, and I can finally start fresh, building a life that's truly ours, free from the shadows of the past. I don't know what the future holds, but I do know that with her by my side, I'm finally free. Free to move on, free to heal, and free to live the life I deserve. Story 2. After All I've Sacrificed is the title of this tale. My spouse insisted that our youngster undergo a DNA test. This is what I did. Okay, so here's the background. You can see why all of this is making me feel really upset. I was raised in a fairly typical household. There are no silver forks here. Both my spouse and I have comparable backgrounds. Families are struggling to stay together and make ends meet. There was definitely no one in our family sitting around with a college degree, and neither of us grew up with a lot of money. To break out from that cycle, we both had to work hard. We somehow made it through college and went on to have respectable professions. We've never had a problem with the fact that I make a little more than he does. I didn't think it was, anyhow. I was already a homeowner at the time of our marriage. Just a tiny, manageable house, nothing spectacular. Although I didn't have a lot of money or anything, I worked hard, saved every cent, and was able to afford a house of my own before we were married. I also owned a car, albeit a simple one, but it was paid for in full. All I wanted to do was manage my finances wisely and avoid getting into debt. In contrast, my spouse was struggling with a significant amount of debt. He had terrible credit. Furthermore, it went beyond student debt. On many occasions, he had had to provide financial support to his family. Every time something went wrong, they would hit him up. And to exacerbate everything, due to his ADHD, he has struggled to keep track of his payments, which hasn't exactly helped his financial circumstances. I never blamed him for any of this. It was all his fault. After all, I was aware of what I was getting into. Despite the chaos, I could see he was making an effort. When he moved in with me, I was there to support him. He didn't have to pay rent because I was paying the mortgage and house insurance. But we decided to divide the costs 50-50. I reasoned that since it was my home, I could manage it. I even began to assist him in repaying his bills. We ultimately placed it in my name as well, since his auto loan was destroying his credit. In order for him to obtain a better rate. I know that seems a little strange, but I assumed that this was the standard behavior for partners. My employment changed after that. With double the compensation and a catch, it was a significant advancement. Travel was essentially 50% of the job. I would be traveling back and forth to these remote data centers, handling large, heavy machinery, relocating cables, and other tasks. It wasn't glitzy. To be honest, it was draining. However, we both felt that this was the best course of action for us. I was supposed to do it for a few years, save money, and help him pay off a significant portion of his debt. I would then go on to something simpler. The plan seemed sound, as if it will prepare us for a better tomorrow. But the work was taxing. I was working in these icy data centers, handling massive equipment, pulling cables, and spending the night in these remote little places. It wasn't like I had much of a social life anymore, and I missed my spouse and my own bed. I put all of my energy into my career, and when I got home, I attempted to put that same intensity into our relationship. In retrospect, I feel as though I was rushing through this because I believed it would benefit us. I persisted in spite of everything. I reasoned that the money was nice and that it would only last for a few years. We were able to save some money, pay off a portion of his debt, and begin considering starting a family. He was appreciative. At least that's how he seemed. However, I had no idea what would happen next. The hard hours, the sacrifices I made, the time lost with friends and family. Everything was meant to be for us. I believed he could see how much effort I was putting into creating a better life for us both. I believed that we were working toward the same goal and were in agreement. I had the impression that we had established a solid basis at that moment. Although he didn't bring a home or a perfect credit score to the marriage, I thought that the two of us could manage anything since he had a nice heart. I really believed that our relationship and collaboration would last no matter what. I had made every effort to demonstrate to him my commitment and my desire to live this life with him. Indeed, it wasn't simple, but you simply make things work when you love someone, don't you? So there I was, thinking we'd worked hard. This was the future we had outlined. We had previously experienced difficult times due to his family's financial needs, his financial disarray, and his lengthy work hours. However, none of that, in my opinion, could undermine what we already had. However, I would soon learn that perhaps he had a different perspective, and I never would have imagined how brutally that reality would hit me. Okay, so this is when things quickly started to go south. My pregnancy was around 8 months along. In essence, simply crossing the finish line. Unexpectedly, my spouse sits me down and requests a paternity test. No build-up, no warning. Just, "Hello, I have been contemplating. I must be certain that this child is mine." I was taken aback. I remember just gazing at him like, What did you just say? My jaw must have been on the ground, and initially I assumed it was a joke. It seemed as though he was playing around, but he wasn't grinning, laughing, or anything. He took it quite seriously. It seemed as though my heart had fallen out of my chest. This was my spouse, after all. The man I had been berating for giving up time and effort. I'm even putting my health at danger for this demanding travel work. As he sits there staring at me, he says he's not sure whether he's the father of the child I'm carrying. I questioned him about why he needed anything like that and why he felt that way. He simply needed to be certain, was all he could say. He made an effort to reassure me that it wasn't about me or personal. He stated he wanted some peace of mind, but that he trusted me. If he truly trusted me, he wouldn't even be asking. So I'm not sure how he could say that without seeming foolish. It was illogical. I had been by his side the entire time, helping him out however I could. But he's now asking me questions. As I persisted, he eventually acknowledged that he had been receiving ideas from friends, relatives, and other individuals. You're sure it's yours, right? They were asking. She is constantly away. Who can tell what's actually happening? And rather than dismissing that, he seemed to take it personally. He began to wonder whether they may be right. He now attacks me with this after I've been pregnant for months. I felt like I had been taken by surprise. That's all I was upset about. I was devastated. It was unbelievable to me that he allowed others who had no knowledge of our connection to instill these doubts in his mind. I had done everything for him after everything we had gone through. He simply trusted them, and I couldn't get rid of the idea that perhaps he had already decided on me if he truly needed this peace of mind. I made an effort to convey how deceived and wounded I felt. He was treating me like a stranger while I was carrying his kid. Naturally, the tears followed. I was a hormonal mess, anxious, worn out, and now battling my spouse, who essentially made me doubt my commitment. I expressed my pain to him because it gave me the impression that all of my sacrifices were in vain. I worked a demanding profession that required me to travel half the time in order to provide us with a consistent income for the baby. He is currently sitting here questioning whether the child is indeed his. It simply broke me. Observing my level of distress, he took a little step back. He began apologizing, claiming that he was simply overanalyzing the situation and that he didn't want to upset me. However, that's the problem. It was already in his words. The question has already been posed by him. The harm was already done. I had the impression that he had completely destroyed any confidence we had established. He then had the audacity to suggest that we could just ignore it and act as though it never happened if it was that big of a concern. However, how can you act as like that didn't occur? How do you simply get over something so large? He assured me that it was only an idea he had and advised me not to take it too seriously and that he wasn't really making any accusations against me. But what was this if he wasn't making accusations against me? He attempted to soften it, but it seemed just like an accusation. He seemed to have concluded that I was someone he needed to be wary of because I had the potential to be unfaithful. And that cannot be removed. He eventually stopped pursuing it, and I believed that perhaps he had finally realized his mistake. Perhaps he was truly ready to move on after realizing how much he had wounded me. He expressed regret and vowed never to bring it up again. However, I was left with the impression that there was a significant break in the basis of our connection. I made an effort to ignore it, concentrate on the baby, and let it go. But I kept thinking about it in the back of my mind. I centered my life on this man, the man with whom I was going to have a kid, and he was behaving as though I didn't exist. That night, I had a million ideas running through my brain as I went to bed. In an attempt to understand how we arrived at this position, I continued playing back the exchange. To be honest, I had no response. I felt the unshakable impression that something had changed. Now, something was different. And that uncertainty would not go away, no matter how hard I tried to ignore it. Okay, so let's fast forward to the arrival of our newborn son. Pregnancy related stress and anxiety, work-related fatigue, and everything else. When I held him for the first time, it kind of disappeared. I thought that all I had endured had been worthwhile since he was flawless. Perhaps this would be the thing that reunited us, I thought. Perhaps all the concerns he had been harboring would simply vanish now that he could see his son. I really hoped that this would be a new beginning for our family. To be honest, though, I sensed something was wrong even during those initial weeks. My spouse wasn't unhappy exactly. Doting on our youngster and acting appropriately, he was ecstatic. However, there was this feeling, this tension, I don't know. I would notice a peculiar expression on his face when he held our son and looked down at him, as if he was giving something too much thought. He continued saying things like, "He looks just like you," and "He has your nose," which, if not for that slight edge in his tone, would have been lovely. He seemed to be looking for evidence. He had to persuade himself that our child was indeed his. I dismissed it at first. I was already upset from the entire infant phase, not getting any sleep and struggling to retain my composure. I told myself that I was reading too much into things and overreacting. However, he subsequently began to allude to it once more. Just a few little remarks here and there. For example, "I wonder whose side of the family he will adopt." Or wouldn't it be absurd if after a few months, he had a completely different appearance? He seemed unable to shake the uncertainty. As if he was only awaiting any indication that he was correct to ask me this question. It was painful. In all honesty, I was recuperating and doing all in my power to care for our boy, and he continues to stare at me as if I had done something wrong. I made an effort to speak with him about it in the hopes that he would open up and share his thoughts. However, each time he dismissed it, he would claim that I was overanalyzing the situation, that I was being overly sensitive, or that he was only observing. However, I sensed it. It was just a fragile trust. The big stunner came next. He brought it up as plain as day one night while we were putting the baby to sleep. "Perhaps we should go with the paternity test. I've been thinking. As simple as that. Right now, no softening, no lead up. Simply puts it out there as if it were unimportant." For a moment, I thought my heart had stopped. I had persuaded myself that he had gone over this and that we were now in agreement, concentrating on our family. He wanted a paternity test, yet here he was, still harboring this mistrust. Like asking for something was normal. At first, I don't believe I even replied. As I tried to comprehend that this was actually occurring, I simply gazed at him. He told me that unless we took this test, he wouldn't let go of the kid I had just given birth to, his child, our child. At last, I questioned him about why he was still feeling this way. Why, after everything we had experienced together, he couldn't trust me. He simply shrugged and claimed that he wanted to confirm something. He said that it was because he wanted to feel good about everything, and that it had nothing to do with me or our relationship. However, I didn't think he wouldn't require this said peace of mind if he truly trusted me. It seemed as though he was only attempting to use me as an excuse for his own fears. I made a final attempt to convey to him how terrible this was, and how it seemed like he was questioning everything about us. However, it seemed like speaking into a blank wall. He believed that this was the only way he would ever be completely comfortable. Furthermore, nothing I said would alter it. He also made an effort to make me feel worse by claiming that I wouldn't have any issues if I really had nothing to conceal. For me, that was the worst part. He seemed to be accusing me once more. However, it was in the open this time. To be honest, I wanted to shout. All I wanted to do was tell him what I had done for him. Every hardship I had endured, every long day of travel, all for this family we were creating and for him. However, I didn't. I had become weary of defending myself, of demonstrating my loyalty, my worthiness, and my unwavering commitment to him. I assured him that it was okay if it meant that much to him. We take the test. I was too tired to resist any longer. To be honest, all I wanted was for it to end. I reasoned that perhaps if we did, he would finally grasp how absurd this whole situation had been, and how much he had harmed me. However, I had no feeling of relief. It only made me feel more empty, if anything. I found myself consenting to something that shouldn't be required of any lady. To reassure the man I had sacrificed everything for. I couldn't get rid of the notion that this wasn't merely a test as I was leaving. He had me prove myself in a way that seemed improper, as if he were putting our entire relationship on trial. What quote is the worst? I wasn't sure I would ever be able to look at him the same way again, even if this test ultimately allayed his fears. Okay, so the paternity test was conducted. He continued to press for it, as if he had forced me into this situation and I had no choice but to accept it. So good. He desired a test. He wanted more than simply one of those online home tests, but I would still provide it to him. No, he needed a legitimate one with legal standing. He also expressed it that way. Everything is official. As if he had already thought everything out. To be honest, I felt sick to my stomach at the thought of him sitting around researching legal paternity tests while I was breastfeeding our baby Dot in any case. We scheduled a meeting when he discovered this agency. Together, we had to go pick up the infant, go through the entire swabbing procedure, sign paperwork, and wait in this little antiseptic room that seemed like it belonged to someone with significant problems. It was unpleasant and chilly, and I was in disbelief that we were there at all. I kept waiting for him to realize how absurd this was. Perhaps take a step back and decide that this isn't what we should do. However, that did not occur. He took it quite seriously. It was quite normal to just sit there like this. We went home after it was over, and he pretended that nothing had happened, that we hadn't just gone through one of the most embarrassing experiences of my life. I walked into our bedroom, shut the door, and sat there, trying to take it all in. I felt as though I had sacrificed a piece of myself to please him, and he didn't even seem to understand. In fact, he was feeling upbeat, as if he were going to resolve a major problem in our relationship. While we awaited the results, all I could think was, did he really think this would fix anything? To put it mildly, it was awkward. I could hardly look at him without sensing this enormous barrier between us, even though he would try to act normal. I couldn't act like everything was fine, even though I didn't want to be cold or punish him. It felt hollow every time I saw him holding our son or saying something in passing about how he would make a good father. As if by subjecting me to this, he had forfeited his entitlement to all of those things. It seems as though he was unable to comprehend that confidence cannot be restored by presenting a piece of paper. The findings finally arrived. I recall that once he opened the package and gave it a quick glance, he just began to smile. Guess what, though? I own him. With a strange, almost relieved laugh, as if he had just been validated, he remarked. The mixture of despair and rage I had at the time is beyond words. All I could say was, he's yours, of course. What he intended me to accomplish is unknown to me. Leap up and down. I'm grateful that he finally had faith in me. I felt heavier, as if the weight he had been carrying had fallen directly on me. Yet he spent the remainder of that night in a wonderful mood, as if a weight had been removed off him. Worst of all, he didn't even appear to realize how dysfunctional I was. He was often telling me how glad he was that we were finally able to move on from this. He seemed to believe that all he had done to me was erased by this piece of paper, as if all the harm he had inflicted had been magically repaired. Here, quote, the problem, though. It was a victory to watch him act like way and grin. I came to the conclusion that perhaps he was not fully aware of what trust meant. He believed he had received a significant response, as if this outcome had resolved our issues, but in reality, nothing had been resolved. If nothing else, it made me realize how far away we went without my knowledge. I made an effort to express my feelings to him and how sad I was that he had allowed his doubts to consume him to the point that he needed a test to trust me. However, each time I attempted to clarify, he dismissed it. Now it's over, he would remark. You don't have to go over it again. As if I were the one prolonging this. As if I were clinging to something that had lost all significance. However, he had made it clear to me in the most obvious way that he didn't trust me, so how could I just drop it? After a while, he appeared almost irritated, as if he couldn't comprehend why I wasn't letting go as quickly as he was. He would say something like, I never doubted you, or I just needed that closure. I simply had to be certain. And it seemed like he was tearing open the wound once again each time he said anything like that. My spouse, with whom I had assumed I would share my life, was discussing closure as if I were a complete stranger he couldn't fully trust. It dawned on me then that perhaps I had been deluding myself. After we received the findings, I assumed that everything would return to normal and that he would realize his mistake. Rather, he felt a sense of relief, as though he had escaped some kind of catastrophe. And I had the impression that the catastrophe had already occurred in our own house. That night, I felt more alone than ever before I went to bed. Beside the man I believed to be my acquaintance. He obviously got what he wanted from all of this, but I ended up with something different. There was a persistent thought that perhaps he didn't view me as his partner after everything I had done and everything we had experienced together. How I perceived him. To be quite honest, I had no idea what to do with that last patch. Okay, comma. So this is how everything ultimately came to a head. As if I hadn't already known he was the father of our son when we received the paternity test results. Something just snapped inside of me. I knew then and there that I couldn't continue doing this after looking at that piece of paper and seeing him sitting there looking content and relieved. There was no marriage here. It wasn't love. This was me going above and above for someone who questioned my devotion, even though I was essentially providing for him. I was finished. Maybe stupidly, I had assumed that when he saw the outcome, he would regret putting me through all of this and understand what a mess he had made. However, he didn't. He just grinned as if he had won something. As if he was suddenly safe. I felt terrible when I saw the relief in his eyes. He seemed to believe he was lucky in some way, as if he had escaped a gunshot. I was sitting there, feeling degraded and deceived, while holding a baby. He just was unable to perceive it. He was unaware of the harm he had caused. Even terrible. He seemed unconcerned. I then informed him that I desired a divorce. Removing a bandage that had been on for too long felt like tearing it off. He initially dismissed it with a laugh, as if he believed I was exaggerating. However, he attempted to dissuade me after realizing that I was serious. "This is just a rough patch and we'll get through this," he began to say. I didn't want to go through this with him though, in all honesty. I no longer respected him. And what's left when respect is gone? That was lost on him. He simply persisted in begging. Months of embarrassment and distrust might be reversed by seeming to be sorry. I informed him that I was tired of being treated as though I had to prove myself. He couldn't even offer me the fundamental trust that should accompany a marriage, despite the fact that I had been there for him through it all, taking on his debt, transferring his car into my name, and helping him sort out the financial disaster he was drowning in. When I told him all of this, I could see that it was finally beginning to sink in. He came to the realization that he had made a huge mistake. However, it was already too late. As soon as the divorce procedure began, I left. For him, it became real. As he attempted to describe it, this was not a tough patch. That was the end. With the house in my name, he was abruptly forced to confront the truth of what he had lost. He was not entitled to it. Without my assistance, he had to handle his own financial issue after moving out and returning to his family. He must have been shocked by that alone. I will no longer save him, no more helping him out or paying off his debt. All that remained was his debt, which he now had to manage alone. To make matters worse for him, he was required to pay me child support because I was the one with primary custody of our kid. Now, this man who had been taking advantage of me while questioning my allegiance had to make amends. And from what I've heard, he didn't have it easy. He was frantically trying to find out how to get by. His relatives and friends weren't really able to assist him either. I suppose he believed that I would always be there to protect him. However, I was finished. After a few months, he began to reappear and make an effort to re-establish himself in my life by claiming to be seeing his kid. I didn't mind that he saw our youngster. He is the father. It became evident that he had other plans, but I wasn't going to stop him from seeing his child. After visits, he would stay behind to attempt to talk to me and persuade me to change my mind about the divorce. He would reminisce about our early days together, discuss how much he missed our time together, even made several attempts to apologize, claiming to be aware of our error. However, I was over it by then. I had moved on from him. Seeing how hard he tried was almost depressing. He still didn't understand though, so it was equally frustrating. He continued repeating things like, "I know we're meant to be together and we can make this work." But all I saw was a man who had let his family's ideas and his own fears to destroy our relationship. The man who didn't think I was faithful because he didn't trust me enough. What gave him the impression that I would want him back? He even attempted to claim that he was someone else at one point, now that he realized his mistakes. The problem is that I had become weary of his assurances. When he received the paternity results, this man was the same one who had sat there smiling, as though he had finally exposed my deception. In my own marriage, he had made me feel alienated. Someone who has to repeatedly demonstrate their value. And now he wanted me back just because he was having a hard time. Thank you, but no. I started establishing limits, letting him know that he could only see our son and that we would only talk about him. Even so, he made an effort to push, claiming that he was adrift without us and missed his family. All I had to do was remind him that he had his opportunity, that he had allowed his marriage to be destroyed by the suspicions of others. He was now forced to deal with the fallout. He finally understood the message. He no longer made as much of an effort, although occasionally he would still remark that he missed me or that he wished things had gone differently. It made no difference. I wasn't going to change my mind about what I had decided. Now that I think about it, I should have anticipated this. Perhaps I had disregarded the warning signs in the hopes that we could resolve the issue and that his fears would subside when he realized how dedicated I was. However, simply loving someone doesn't make them change. Despite my unwavering loyalty, he chose to distrust me and believe others instead of me. Additionally, I decided to leave someone who didn't value me. Knowing that I had made the correct decision, I ultimately emerged from it stronger. I had finished spending my life and proving myself to an unworthy person. My house, my son, and my peace of mind are all here now. To be honest, I couldn't have asked for anything more. Story 3. I have a twin sister and am a 27-year-old man. My twin sister and I were treated somewhat differently by our parents as children. For some reason, my parents actually appeared to believe that my sister was destined for greatness, whereas I was the black sheep, simply because I preferred playing sports over studying. They were always comparing us, which was hurtful and discouraging. As a child, I spent a lot of time feeling quite bad about myself. I felt as though I was only there at my sister's extravagant birthday celebrations when I was a child, not really a parent. I was occasionally dragged into playing tea party games at her sleepovers with her friends when they would laugh and have a good time. I wasn't very inclined to But what do you know? In all honesty, I also kind of liked those tea gatherings. My grandmother seemed to be the only one who genuinely cared about my family and myself. She always brought my favorite chocolates when she came to visit, and occasionally she even gave me some cash so I could treat myself. However, things began to shift. My twin sister received so much attention that it became a form of emotional abuse directed at me. My parents began mocking my academic performance and stifling my aspirations. I had the impression that I would never be able to live up to their expectations, no matter how hard I tried. Despite my athletic prowess, they forbade me from participating in extracurricular activities because they wanted me to focus solely on my education, similar to my sister. As a youngster, I felt powerless, and it was frustrating. I recall a particular instance in which my dad and I got into a very heated dispute regarding my future. They intended to spend the majority of the money they had saved for our college funds on my sister's schooling when I started applying for college, because they didn't want to pay for me. They thought she would perform better because she chose to attend a pricey institution. Instead of sending me to a reputable university of my choosing, they wanted me to attend a community college. My parents didn't appear to want to put much money into me, despite the fact that I had very high marks. My grandma and my parents got into a heated argument once she found out about this. She even threatened to divorce my mother if they didn't agree to send me to a reputable university, as they had done for my sister. They argued for several days before giving in. This is why I will always be grateful to my grandmother. The first time I got the sensation of independence was when I moved away to attend college. I had no one looking over my shoulder. Nobody was attempting to compete with me or compare my grades. I got to know people and made acquaintances with folks who shared my interests. Even though my family had left me with physical and mental wounds throughout the years, I focused on moving past them and making the most of my college experience. I became aware of my talent for graphic and logo design at this period. In order to earn some extra cash, I made the decision to begin learning Photoshop and Adobe Illustrator by watching YouTube tutorials. I then spoke with nearby companies to see if they required a logo designer, and I gradually began compiling a portfolio of my work. I keep up my side business while I'm in college and never ask my parents for money. Instead of landing a corporate job after graduation, I saw that I could make my side project a genuine business. Life was improving when I decided to move into an apartment with roommates, since I already had clients who were willing to keep me on retainers after years of being faithful to them. In the meantime, my parents assured me that my sister was doing well and preparing for more biology coursework. Over the years, especially when we transferred institutions, we lost touch. My parents never really tried to get in touch with me throughout the years. I gave up trying as a result. After all, I had been attending treatment for years and was finally financially independent. As a result, I've begun to gradually recover from my childhood injuries. As a graphic designer, I am aware of how crucial evaluations are. To assist more people learn about my firm, I usually encourage my clients who are happy with my work to provide a review on Google or Facebook. One of my high-end clients recently expressed his satisfaction with my work in a lengthy Facebook message, praising my professionalism and work ethic. The kind gesture truly caught me off guard, and I began receiving messages from random people who were curious in my work. Since he had tagged me in his post, my whole family and close friends saw it, and several of them started commenting on it to congratulate me on my success. At that point, I believed that my situation was finally improving, but it quickly deteriorated. Last week, I received an unexpected call from my parents asking to meet with me. I was a little surprised because they had never visited me at college or exhibited any interest in my life in all these years. I thought about it for days and even discussed it with my therapist. Perhaps they wanted to apologize after learning about the trauma I had endured as a youngster. After a long period of time, in case things didn't work out, I made the decision to have lunch with them in a public setting. And I had to get out fast, the day I got to know them. My mother, as usual, kept her distance and smiled briefly, but my father came in right away to give me a hug. We sat down, talked a little, then gave our orders. I wanted them to just get right to the point since I was already feeling nervous. I then questioned why, after all these years, they had now gotten in touch with me. My mother then revealed something shocking. They had just learned that my sister, the family's golden child, was 2 months pregnant. I was unprepared for the news, and I nearly choked on my cocktail. It turned out that my sister was expecting a child after having a one-night affair with a man at a party. She had just learned about it. She was also unable to find the father because she had never asked for his name. She thus intended to return to live with our parents, who would help her with the baby's care while she tried to finish her studies at home. According to my parents, they reached out to me because they needed my financial assistance. They said that I would soon become an uncle and that I would be required to help take care of my sister's impending baby. As their comments took hold, my face grew enraged. They only asked for my help because of my pregnant sister, after I had always felt like an afterthought. I motioned for the bill right away, paid it, and hurried out of the restaurant, insisting that I be a decent son and that the baby required a good role model. My mother pursued me. When I got home, I shut off my phone since my folks were constantly calling and messaging me. When I eventually turned my phone back on the next day after a restful night, I saw a long text from my sister in addition to my mother's missed calls and texts. She made demands in her message, requesting that I be a helpful uncle and look after her child. She assured me that since I was now successful and making a nice living, I shouldn't be self-centered and could afford to give her a few $100s each month to help with the baby's care. I didn't bother to respond to her at all. I hung up on her. I spent hours in bed that night because I simply couldn't sleep. I was wide awake since I was still bothered by this whole event. My sister's entitlement, my parents' patronizing demeanor, and their years of abuse were all too much for me to handle, and I couldn't stand it anymore. At this point, I made the decision to write about my predicament on Facebook using my own ID. I just wanted the truth to be known, and I assumed that only my close Facebook friends and family would read this. I documented everything, even how my parents had made me feel inadequate throughout the years and had only contacted me when they needed money. I closed my laptop and went to bed after posting it. The post became viral within hours, and I found out this when I woke up the next day. People from my buddy list, family members, and even total strangers sent supportive comments on my postings, and some even shared them. It seems that many individuals could relate to the mistreatment and found resonance in the post's message. It was devastating to read the hundreds of comments left by others who had similar experiences with abuse in their families. Some of my relatives may have phoned my parents in a rage since my mother called me quite agitated and ordered me to take down the post right away. She stated that she hadn't contacted me sooner because she had always doubted my professional achievements and believed I wouldn't amount to anything. But after reading my client's glowing review, she saw how successful my firm was and reached out to me for assistance with my sister. She persisted in stressing how crucial it is that we safeguard the family's reputation. My father had a slightly different reaction. In addition to apologizing via text, he asked me to take down the article so that we could discuss the matter in private and shield the family's reputation from further harm. This abrupt public disclosure of our problematic family dynamics throughout my youth appears to have taken my parents by surprise. My family always gave preference to my sister and persuaded me that I would never succeed professionally. But they immediately wanted to play family with me when I called them out in a Facebook post. My parents have repeatedly pleaded for the post to be removed. To disprove them all, I decided to quit the position as it was. I can now enjoy the final laugh. The family is now divided as a result of this choice. In contrast, my grandma and a few other relatives have publicly shown their support and reached out to me. Some people, particularly on my dad's side, are telling me to keep family issues private. I stay because I finally had the last laugh after criticizing my parents on Facebook and refused to remove the post. After a long period of time, it has been an intense week since I last told my experience, and I'm really grateful for everyone's kindness and support. Knowing that I'm not alone during this moment is encouraging. Since we live in a small area, everyone is familiar with us. Following my Facebook post, which apparently sparked discussions among our social circle, my parents have come under fire from close friends and neighbors, as well as from relatives who were previously ignorant of the amount of emotional abuse and favoritism. My family members informed me of the reason behind their unexpected contact with me. As you can see, my parents are now content with their retirement after spending the majority of their savings to pay off debt and travel. Due to my parents' desire that she focus only on her education, my sister has never had a job and has no funds. They now recognize they needed financial help when the baby was born. When they saw the review my customer had posted on Facebook and named me in it, they were surprised that I had disproved them all and established myself after realizing that my business was performing well and that I was making more money than they had anticipated. However, they used this as a chance to request financial assistance rather than sending me well wishes. But they were forced to concede when I refused and made the decision to openly discuss the matter on Facebook. After I published the piece, my sister contacted me a few days ago, and she sounded furious, just as I had anticipated. It seems that our parents have decided to stop providing financial support for her and the child because they no longer want to indulge her and instead want her to be accountable for her own behavior. As long as my sister puts her aspirations for further education on hold for the time being and begins hunting for employment using her degree in biology, they are cool with her moving in. In order to tell the father about the pregnancy, they also want her to get in touch with him via prenatal paternity testing. After listening to my parents' opinions, my sister, who had never in her life been required to assume any responsibility, was at a loss. She believed she could expose me to director anger, but this time I chose to speak out and defend myself. I informed her that just because she became pregnant after a one-night affair, she didn't deserve my hard-earned money. I told her that I wasn't really bothered by her immaturity. However, I may have came out as unforgiving. My sister realized she could no longer intimidate me, and I think it was a turning point in our interaction. I felt proud of myself for voicing my opinions as I hung up the phone. I proceeded to send my sister and parents a group text message informing them that I was expecting a formal apology for the abuse I had endured. I wanted them to understand how hurt I was by the abuse I had received over the years. This apology was more than just a request, the text made clear. It was a prerequisite, an essential step in the healing process. I made it clear that I was at a point where I could no longer go in the same direction. Their actions had taken an emotional toll that was too great to endure any longer. It could be the end of our relationship if they didn't take this action and didn't want to own up to their mistakes. I will now wait to see their response. I hope they make the right choice because the ball is in their court. Even though a month has passed, I still get a ton of support and responses from random people every day. Since I told the truth and no longer have to worry about keeping my past hidden from the world, I feel a lot lighter. I want to start by letting everyone know that, contrary to what many people seem to have assumed from the comments, I am completely safe and not depressed. I was originally affected by what occurred with my parents, but I have now learned to put it behind me for my own mental health. I truly have no influence over what other people do, as my therapist clarified. My emotions are the only thing I have control over. My parents have made many attempts to contact me since I gave them the ultimatum, alternating between apologizing and downplaying the circumstances. They are still having a hard time accepting that our family's issues have been made public, and it's obvious that they care more about their own image than they do about my sentiments. After giving it some thought, I decided to take the Facebook post down from my page, even though I had intended to leave it on indefinitely. I came to see that the post had achieved exactly what I had wanted for. A public statement denouncing my parents for the years of cruelty they had inflicted. My mother continues to feel that I should have done better and called these things out years earlier to them, instead of letting it build up for so long and embarrassing them publicly. This truly annoys me, since as a teenager I had always attempted to talk to them about the matter, but they never listened to me. I've informed her that if she believes that it was my responsibility for how she treated me, then I would want to take some space from her, as I didn't want this to affect my mental well-being anymore. As for my sister, she took a bit, but ultimately she shocked me with an apology. I don't know if it's the pregnant hormones or a sudden insight that drove her to reach out. In the lengthy note, she indicated that she could finally appreciate the struggles I had to bear for being treated differently all those years, with all parents no longer offering financial assistance, and telling her every day to accept responsibility for her actions. She was facing the stresses I had faced growing up. She went on to explain that when she originally found out she was pregnant, it had created anxiety in her heart. She became acutely aware of her faults, and the fact that she would have to deal with this alone. Money was tight, and she admitted that she had been angry at me in the wrong place. She believed she could ask me to help since she had heard from our parents that I was succeeding in my work. She eventually realized, however, that she would have to be accountable for her own life when I refused. She informed me that in order to provide a better example for her child, she was making every effort to obtain employment. She promised not to do it ever again and expressed regret for requesting money from me. She expressed her desire for me to serve as a positive masculine role model for her unborn child. We had lunch together, and despite my hesitation, I accepted the apology. She was seeking for a job, which pleased me as well, and I offered to assist her with her cover letter and CV. My sister has been urging us to discuss what I went through with our parents since we first started talking, so they can better comprehend my point of view. However, I don't believe I'm prepared to speak with them just yet. This weekend, I finally make the long overdue trip to see my grandma. Over the years, she has consistently been at my side, supporting me and being my rock. When I visited her, it was time for me to sincerely thank her for everything she had done for me. My childhood memories came flooding back. I liked everything about her, including the warm grin on her face, the creaking wooden flooring, and the comforting smell of her home-cooked meals. We spoke about our lives, our aspirations, and our families all afternoon long. She expressed her pride in me for confronting my parents after all these years. She informed me that while she had consistently called out my parents' unjust treatment of me, they had never responded. I wanted her to know that her generosity to me had had a significant impact on my life, and that I didn't blame her for whatever my parents had done to me. Speaking of which, my graphic design firm, in which many of you have been interested, is doing really well. Since my high-end customer left a good review of my work, my email has been overflowing with questions, just as I had anticipated. It gives me an incalculable sense of happiness to know that my clients value my work. It's not only about my business expanding, it's also about being confirmed that I'm headed in the correct direction. With each new investigation, I feel like I'm getting closer to my objectives and am inspired to keep going. Seeing that all of the effort and hard work I've put into this is now paying off is really exciting. All things considered, I would say that this entire experience has been difficult, yet tremendously freeing. I intend to concentrate only on my career, personal development, and time spent with encouraging friends and family for the time being. Even yet, I have no idea where the lengthy road to recovery will take me. I am grateful for the abundance of compassion and support I have gotten from the Reddit community. Even though I've made some progress in repairing my ties with my family, I'm determined to put my own health first and make sure I'm never again the target of emotional abuse or partiality. If something intriguing comes up, I'll keep sharing news. Over the last 6 months, a lot has changed in my life and things have truly worked out. Meeting my niece has been one of the most exquisite and transformative events of my life. The cutest baby girl was born to my sister, who was expecting. She wanted me to be her godfather, and I am really thrilled to have this unique responsibility. I quote, "am excited to see this little one grow up as we embark on a new chapter in our family's history." My parents have worked hard over the last 6 months to try to patch things up between us. As it happens, my grandma and other family members had a heart-to-heart conversation with them, and it appears that this had an impact. In particular, my mother has been making a concerted effort to establish a stronger connection with me. She acknowledged that she felt guilty and remorseful for not being a better mom to me. I was brought to tears by her sincere apologies, since these were the words I had been waiting so long to hear. I kept thinking about how things may have turned out differently if Mother had spoken these things to me while I was growing up, thus saving me years of anguish and suffering. In contrast, my dad has proposed that I take up golf, highlighting the possibility that it will help me draw in more affluent customers. Golf has proven to be harder than I thought it would be, and it definitely takes some committed practice to become proficient. Still, I like spending every weekend training with my dad and becoming better every time. Over time, my connection with my sister has also changed a lot. We now routinely get together for breakfast on Saturday mornings to catch up on each other's lives. We also located the child's father and contacted him. A court-signed agreement to co-parent the child was reached by both of them. I met him, and he seemed like a sincere person. My sister has been putting a lot of effort into changing herself ever since she became a mother. She seemed to have understood the value of empathy and comprehension. It was past time for something. Additionally, she has found a work-from-home option that works well for her. It's encouraging to watch her make positive life changes to help heal the long-standing animosities and unsaid sentiments in our family. She is working hard to save money to leave our parents' house. We all intend to attend family therapy shortly. The process hasn't been simple, and occasionally our discussions tend to become emotionally charged. Therefore, seeking therapy will enable us to have more candid discussions in a professional setting. My graphic design firm has grown significantly as a result of the abilities I've acquired over the years. I'm thankful for my employment and genuinely like my work. Nothing is more fulfilling to me than working on my designs and helping my clients. Therefore, I'm happy that I discovered my real purpose early in life. I've been successful in growing my clientele to a global scale, after receiving several compliments from my current clientele. If all goes according to plan, I want to use my expertise in the field to teach college students and aspiring graphic designers for free. I recall the difficulties I had when I was new to this industry and had no mentors. Therefore, I'm hopeful that these people will benefit from my workshops. The future and the prospects it presents for my life and profession fascinate me. My life is going well right now, and I am really appreciative of everyone's love and support over the last few months. I quote, "am hoping that this will be my final post on the matter.